In a new opinion piece for the Washington Post, former UN ambassador under Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, is urging the incoming Biden administration to adopt some of Donald Trump's foreign policy ideas, right? Now, he wasn't able to carry out anything that he actually wanted to carry out other than the more damaging policies. However, Nikki Haley isn't talking about pulling troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan, something that we actually agreed with Donald Trump on. No, she wants to have Biden carry out, or at least continue, the escalation of war with China. And unfortunately, based on what we've heard from Biden in response to China, she might just get what she wants on that end. So why don't we start with China, then we'll go on to other foreign policy issues. She writes this: Biden is sure to feel strong partisan pressure to reject most, if not all, of Trump's foreign policy. That would be a mistake. Sweeping away the achievements and strategies of the past 4 years would endanger American safety and interests. Now, she doesn't really get too specific about the so-called achievements and strategies, because really when it comes to foreign policy, Trump hasn't succeeded in anything, even when his instincts were right, like with pulling troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan. But let's get back to China. She wants Biden to continue ramping up tensions with China. She writes, first, Biden should keep key aspects of Trump's China policy. Trump overturned decades-old bipartisan consensus that economic cooperation with China would push the Chinese Communist Party in a more peaceful direction. A new bipartisan consensus is rising against that flawed thinking. Communist China is the most serious global threat the United States faces. So I have a problem with that framing. And my number one problem is that the United States didn't engage economically with China, hoping that it would somehow persuade China to switch from communism to capitalism. We were looking for cheap labor. And this shift, of course, happened under the Clinton administration. And that's when we started losing a ton of our jobs overseas to countries like China. So we very much engaged in that process. Our government very much engaged in that process. And that's why so many of our products get manufactured in other countries like China. That's the reason why we had a shortage of protective gear like masks, because our supply chain is very reliant on China and other countries. So this was never about like, ooh, let's democracy building. No, we don't do that. Let's stop pretending like that's what our government is actually trying to accomplish abroad, because it's not. Also, Biden has pretty harsh rhetoric toward China as well, and I'll tell you where that comes from in just a second. But Cenk, I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so the main difference between establishment Republicans and Donald Trump is that establishment Republicans are more sophisticated liars. They're way better at lying, and in a way that gives the mainstream media tremendous comfort. So this is an editorial run in the Washington Post with no controversy at all. So there are things ranging from normal policy disagreements. So should we be tough on China when they steal some of our, intellectual property, trade secrets, etc.? Well, first of all, everybody agrees we should, but there's an interesting policy discussion and debate about how we should be tough on China on that. So that's perfectly normal, right? That's pretty much the only one. Everything else is nonsense, craziness. So, and misdirection. So for example, she does this along with every other Republican, and mainstream media goes along with it. Oh my God, historic peace deals in the Middle East between Saudi Arabia and Israel and UAE and Israel. Oh my God, what a statesman, right? No, Saudi Arabia and Israel were already massive allies. They were totally aligned against Iran. Saudi Arabia wants us to invade Iran even more than Israel does. So to paint that as something new, I mean, Nikki Haley knows that's a lie, and the media goes along with it. Like, oh, well, they signed a deal, okay. So, and then when she talks about China, it gets even more dangerous, honestly, where she says, they're harboring military ambitions and they're a military threat to us. Really? China's about to take over Santa Fe? What? China's a military threat, how? And so, like you say, okay, takeover of Hong Kong. I can't stand what they're doing in Hong Kong, and we've been super clear about that. But Hong Kong got handed back to them through a deal that they had with the UK. They did not roll in tanks like Russia did in Crimea and in other places. So this whole talk of China being a military threat so that we have to spend more on defense companies and support politicians like Nikki Haley is sophisticated lying, and it's very, very dangerous lies. And so
it is.
And the fact that the mainstream media gives it more credibility makes it more dangerous than a guy like Trump in some ways.
No, you guys, I mean, look, the very obvious pivot to China is something that people should be paying very close attention to, because there is a concerted effort by private military contractors to start heavily militarizing that region of the world. And if you look at where the funding comes from, remember, Nikki Haley, until very recently, served on the board of Boeing. Okay, she served on the board of Boeing. I mean, she has very close ties to defense contractors. And really, the reason why you're hearing this rhetoric regarding China's military capability is because China has in fact expanded its spending and resources on the military and its military capability. There's no question. It still comes nowhere close to where the United States is. We still outspend every other country by far when it comes to our military. But when you look at when China made that decision to start spending more of its resources on the military, it happened when, honestly, Obama made a pretty terrible calculation with his so-called pivot to Asia. And that was when in 2015, he started visiting Asian countries, including China. And that kind of tipped China off to the fact that the United States, under pressure from military contractors, was starting to think about not only pivoting to Asia militarily, but trying to find ways to basically sell arms to countries like Japan. And by the way, to India as well. And so weapons manufacturers, private contractors, they see this as a good financial opportunity for them. And honestly, when Obama made that trip, that kind of tipped the Chinese off. And then at that point, they started spending even more money on their military. So when you look at what persuades our politicians to focus so heavily on China. Again, just look at these think tanks that are heavily funded by defense contractors, foreign countries as well. And then they go off and they do the lobbying in Washington to persuade our lawmakers, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, to have a more hardline approach toward China with the first step of militarizing countries in that region. And by the way, Joe Biden, real quick, Joe Biden even said this. He hasn't been very detailed about what he plans to do with China, but every once in a while he slips up and he says things like this. The most effective way to meet the challenge is to build a united front of friends and partners to challenge China's abusive behavior. That means selling weapons. That's really what it means. That's what started under Obama. That's what has continued under Donald Trump. Donald Trump made record weapon sales to Japan, and I guarantee you it will continue under Joe Biden as well.
Yeah, there's one part of Nikki Haley's op-ed that is true. She said there is a growing bipartisan consensus that China is a military threat. Well, yes, but that's why it's unconscionable for the Washington Post not to note her enormous conflict of interest. She makes money by being on the board of Boeing. Now, Boeing makes tons of money if we go to war, but we don't have to go to war. They make billions upon billions of dollars because of militarization. Just the build up for in anticipation of war drives their profits. If you think Boeing doesn't care about profits, you're insane. I mean, Alex Jones would laugh that conspiracy theory out of the building. Oh no, multinational corporations don't care about profits. Really? Wait, I hope you're not a reporter if you're anywhere near that direction. So the reason I bring that up is because then they'll say, oh no, we didn't note that because Nikki Haley's on their board and makes hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of dollars from Boeing, but we didn't bother noting it because both Boeing and Nikki Haley are angels and they wouldn't care about the money that they're making. Come on. That's outrageous. It's outrageous. And so do Democrats also sometimes serve on the boards as employees? Do they get campaign contributions from defense contractors? Absolutely. Do they then vote for further militarization? Absolutely. They did it during the Trump era. Whatever Trump wanted, Pelosi gave him at least that much, if not more. So did Schumer. So these Democrats are in on the game, and that's what we're so worried about. Just because we beat the fascists like Donald Trump doesn't mean that the war is over. The establishment is much more sophisticated in their oppression, their militarization of this country. And speaking of oppression, I just want to note one other thing from her op-ed, which I thought was actually the most heinous part. She wrote, Trump refused to accept the tired thinking that the Palestinian cause was the key to broader regional peace. In other words, people are tired about caring about Palestinians. Nobody cares about them. We just told Saudi Arabia, hey, your interest in butchering the Yemenis, the people from Yemen, is greater than your interest in supporting your fellow Muslims in Palestine. And they agreed. They thought crushing Yemen and causing a genocide there and making money off of all of this was more important than the Palestinian cause. Yes, that is true, unfortunately, but it is not something to celebrate. And she just like flippantly, like, oh, we already threw the Palestinians in the trash, so we don't have to worry about them anymore. God, these Republicans are the most awful people on earth.
And of course, I have to mention one final, policy that she wants Biden to continue on with, and that's aggression toward Iran. I'm gonna go to the last graphic here. How can Biden foster a deeper peace? Not by caving to Iran or turning on Israel, both of which would fray a nascent Arab-Israeli bond that still needs strengthening. The better path is to continue to isolate Iran and encourage harmony between Israel and the Arab states, which now clearly see their common interests. So remember, we were at a pretty good place with Iran following the Iran nuclear deal, which was negotiated by the Obama administration and several other countries. And it was Donald Trump who decided to come in, rip up that peace deal, that Iran nuclear deal, I should say, which did have the proper checks in place to ensure that Iran wasn't building nuclear weapons. Now Iran is free to do what it wants, really, because why would it follow through with a nuclear deal that was basically thrown away by Donald Trump? And so that we did not need to escalate tensions with Iran. That's exactly what Donald Trump did. And now Nikki Haley is coming in and saying, we better continue doing that. Don't in any way try to actually mend whatever hostilities we have with Iran. And it's just, again, it always goes back to more war, right? It always goes back to selling more weapons. It always goes back to this profit-driven motive. Because when you look at her whole piece, there's nothing in there about withdrawing troops from the Middle East. There's nothing in there about, hey, maybe we need to approach North Korea from a more diplomatic approach rather than antagonizing them the way that we have. Now, clearly, I don't want anyone to come in and do what Donald Trump did, where you're going on these like photo ops and talking about how you fell in love with Kim Jong-un. But I also don't think it makes sense to ramp up tensions the way that lawmakers, both on the left and the right, have done historically in this country. But Nikki Haley looking out for companies like Boeing, other defense contractors, weapons manufacturers. That's the bread and butter. So she's gonna keep pushing it.
Yeah, so last thing here, she's a warmongering against Iran because they're a religious dictatorship. What do you think Saudi Arabia is? It's a religious dictatorship, but no, Iran's really dangerous to us. Really? Did Al-Qaeda come out of Iran? No, they're Shia. Al-Qaeda is Sunni. Al-Qaeda came out of Saudi Arabia. Osama bin Laden was Saudi. He was a Saudi prince. So no, there is a threat to America that has attacked us over and over again. There is a religious fundamentalist Muslim government that is a dictatorship that butchers its own people and sometimes our people. And that's Saudi Arabia, the one she's praising. Oh my God, let's work with Saudi Arabia to create more wars. So our enemies are awesome, but people we make peace deals with are terrible. So that's neocon thinking. And so Nikki Haley's angling for the neocon play in 2024. This op-ed is basically telling her donors, defense contractors, and oil companies, which greatly profit from instability in the Middle East, and other donors, I'm here to serve you. This is my advertisement. My services, political services are for sale, and I will definitely create more war and conflict for you. politics in America is disgusting. And the fact that the media doesn't point out those obvious political points is even more disgusting.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.